Today we have the pleasure of meeting Gargi. I'm going to turn it over to Gargi. Can you please introduce yourself?
Hello everyone. My name is Gargi Saha. I'm from India. I am based out of Bihar presently. But before this, I've worked in several states in India in child protection. I started my career in child protection from Delhi, New Delhi, which is the capital, national capital of India. And in fact, I joined Childline. I think Child Helpline is present across a lot of countries, around the world. But I'm happy to share that the first one was in India in 1996, and I joined, early 2001 to around that time. As soon as I finished my master's in Delhi, I was always very motivated to work for children for the cause of most marginalized children. I mean, that's like my first natural love, after nature and flowers. So yeah, I started working with Childline as a Childline coordinator, and very quickly I moved on to become the city coordinator for Delhi. So Childline is an emergency helpline for children in distress and in difficult circumstances. Any kind of child, who's a street child, orphan, single parented, who abused, sexually abused, physically abused, is a victim of child marriage, child labor, child trafficking, or is in need of emotional care and support. So all these kind of calls we used to receive, and this was India's first intervention helpline, which means that the service does not end with the call. It actually begins. The call is the starting point, and then we have a whole range of services, referrals, and then also linkages with the district child protection services or the state child protection services, restoration, repatriation, rescue, all of that, and then we had a follow-up mechanism. So that gave me a lot of insight on how work happens on the ground level, especially from from a Delhi point of view, which was one of the huge, largest destination point for children, who would come as child laborers or get trafficked for domestic work and various other things. And then I moved on to, as a senior program coordinator with Childline India Foundation, and I was looking after 5 northern states in India. So this role gave me a huge insight into, how to do policy advocacy with the highest level, and how to advocate with the respective state governments, with the telecom department and various departments, because, as Childline, we were engaging with health, with labor, with the women and child, etc. And then, of course, I also work very closely with the Ministry of Women and Child based in Delhi, and choosing partners, choosing the civil society organizations and things like that. And then I was, during that role, in my role, I was also invited thrice by the Strathclyde Police Scotland, as well as the US government sponsored my visit to Tokyo as part of there was a United Nations, conference on human trafficking. And in Scotland, I did deliver some talks and some trainings for the Strathclyde and the Scotland Yard Police on trafficking. So all these gave me a lot of, opportunities to really grow when I was still quite young. I was in my 20s at that time. And then, I was also chosen by the Atlas Corps Fellowship as one of the young leaders from India. We were only 3 that time, and only 2 of us could complete the fellowship. It was a 1-year fellowship, a very prestigious fellowship, and I was based out of Washington DC that time, and out of Ashoka's Changemakers Youth Venture. I worked for a year there, as well as learned and shared, and then I came back to India. And that's when there was a huge, floods as a natural disasters in the northern part of Bihar, and I joined, as a state anti-trafficking consultant for UNICEF. And then the journey with UNICEF, continued. So I am going to complete 14 years, with this organization for the cause of the most marginalized children. And before Bihar, I was in Chhattisgarh, which is one of the conflict-affected states. And I worked on issues like girl child trafficking, on conflict, where children were caught between the state and the non-state actors and so on. And then, of course, natural disasters in Bihar, like floods. We have yearly floods and all that, and plus child protection in emergencies, mental health, as well as cyber safety. These are coming out as, I mean, apart from the issues that I discussed, these are coming up as the more recent child protection issues, and a lot of children are getting affected. Of course, Bihar is also the largest in terms of children going out for labor. It is one of the largest. Also, children getting trafficked or into forced labor and migration, because it is one of the poorest states in India. But also because children have aspirations and things like that, and there are not many industries in that sense. So we are also working very closely with adolescents here, the most marginalized sections, and trying to understand their aspirations, their needs, and how we can support them to build their future, and all this new in terms of, their skills enhancement on the 21st century skills and so on. I also work very closely with the government of Bihar, with the police, law enforcement, as well as the High Court judiciary on several aspects, and some other oversight mechanisms like the State Commission for Child Protection. So these are all, to protect children overall, to make policies, child-friendly policies, for example, child-friendly policing. I developed a package for the police, in Chhattisgarh, which I tried to model in Bihar as well, of course, with a few revision and adaptations. So yeah, so largely this has been a very, very exciting journey. And I feel that child protection, although it's a new and emerging area, because it is, compared to nutrition, health, or education, child protection is still emerging. And, we are being thrown with very new kind of challenges. But I think it's a very, very exciting area, and there's a lot of future in child protection because, I forgot to share that in 2022, I also got an opportunity to work in Ethiopia, in Africa, for 3 months. And that was another very, very eye-opening kind of a experience where I worked as a drought focal point, and the country was facing L3 emergencies at that time. So all this has given a very, very rich experience of, how also to see both the points of how, so after my visit to Africa, I no longer consider India as a very developing country. I feel, we are still in that sense at a, at a much progressive level. But then nonetheless, there are very, issues of urban challenges and rural challenges and so on. So yeah. Thank you so much, Avi, for this session and for this question.
No, thank you for joining us. Wonderful to hear about your background and incredibly impressive. So you currently live in Bihar. Am I pronouncing it correctly? Yeah, okay. Can you give us a sense? So Bihar as a province, is it on the, you said northern, is it eastern, western? Is it bordering Afghanistan and Pakistan? No?
No, so Bihar is bordering with Nepal and Bangladesh. So so it is like eastern and also northern. So not so much north; it's more east, but then still it's kind of north towards eastern and the northern side. So towards the extreme eastern part, and it's also bordering with other states within India like Uttar Pradesh, Jharkhand, West
Okay.
Bengal. So there are a lot of trafficking cases happening with Nepal and Bangladesh.
With Nepal, that's what I was going to ask, where you mentioned that. So it's with Nepal and Bangladesh. Got it. Um, and so can you explain, because when I spoke with you in preparing for this, I said to you the very first individual, and I was excited to have you on because I'm trying to meet with individuals from hopefully every country around the world, and you're the very first one from India. And so I'm curious, and those watching might be incredibly curious about what is child protection like as a system in India? Can you describe it for us? Give us a sense of what are the laws, the policies, the methodology? How does child protection get done on the front line in India, and it's specifically in Bihar?
Yeah, so specifically in the interesting thing is that India has got very strong the legislation part of it, the laws, the policies, the legislation, and we are governed by the Juvenile Justice Act, which is the single key legislation for all children up to from 0 to 18 years of age. If any other act, I mean, if there's any conflict, the JJ Act, we call it the JJ Act in short, Juvenile Justice Act. So that overrules the other, legislations. But then Juvenile Justice Act was enacted in 2000, but we have had three amendments, till date. The last was in 2021. And apart from this, there is another act called POCSO, Prevention of Children Against Sexual Offences Act. And this is a very, very stringent act which was enacted in 2012. And, this is covering because previously there was no one act for any kind of sexual abuse. So this was a legislation which covered all kind of, children who were being harassed or sexually abused or exploited under any garb, trafficking, everything. So this is a very, very stringent act, and the punishments are also very, very, stringent. Then we have the Child Labor Protection Prevention, and Regulation Act (CLPRA), as well as the Child Marriage Prevention Act. Then there is the Information Technology Act, the SCST, which is the Minorities Act. So why I'm saying this is that in Bihar, these are very, very important because Bihar has a fairly good percentage of children who come from the minority population and the most marginalized. So these are very, very critical acts. As well as so after every act, the legislations are for the entire country. So for example, like I said, I was in other states before Bihar, so the legislations would be covering all the children across the country. However, the rules, after the legislation, every state forms their own rules. And that is where we also play a very, very significant role in terms of handholding the government, giving technical support in terms of, in terms of the context of the state and to create rules in that state. For example, in Bihar, as per the National Family Health Survey, that's one of the most authentic surveys that happens every 5 years or sometimes even 2 years. So according to the last NFHS 5 survey, which happened in 2021 too, Bihar has the second highest number of percentage of child marriage, which means 40.8 children were being married at an early age in Bihar. I mean, below the legal age. So then we were forming, we have formed a SOP, which is the guidelines and the rules and things like that. And then there's a state plan of action. So in Bihar, child labor and child marriage are very important issues which have been there for more than a decade and a half or so. And still the situation is not drastically, changed. Of course, it's now much better than before, but not like drastically changed. But so then we put more focus on developing rules and guidelines and the roles and responsibilities of the key stakeholders as per the act, as per the legislation. And then we have trainings and capacity building for those functionaries in partnership with the government. So all this is like done. For example, currently, we just provided the government technical support on drafting state rules for the child marriage and the child labor, and also creating a state plan of action. It is still work in progress. So yeah.
Okay, so if I understand you correctly, by definition within India, the statutory or the laws cover, if we were to define child protection, we're talking about, you said, sexual, we're talking about child marriage. Is there any laws or around physical abuse, emotional? Is that also included?
Yes. So in both Juvenile Justice Act and POCSO, the physical abuse part is also included.
Okay.
However, POCSO is more about the sexual abuse part, but in the Juvenile Justice Act does cover the physical abuse part also. The mental health, there's a different act and a different set of rules for the mental health part, but it is still not that pronounced. Mental health is still very, very new and emerging, especially after COVID, we saw more emphasis on the mental health side.
I hear you. Okay.
I also would like to share with you that in Bihar, we also have developed, there's a rules called, there's a state guideline called Astitva, which is specifically for all the survivors of child or women trafficking. It's
Okay.
Bihar specific.
So quite comprehensive. And okay, so you talked about what the governing policies, the laws. So in Bihar, who is responsible for enacting all these laws? And if you can give us a sense of how on a day-to-day child protection gets done in Bihar. So I'll give you an example. So where I'm from in Canada, we have institutions made up of social workers primarily who receive reports, and then they go investigate them. And if they're serious enough where it involves sexual abuse or serious physical, the police gets involved, and then they work with families, and primarily for the purpose of ensuring that children are safe at home with families, but there are situations where children are removed and are placed in foster homes or kinship or things like that. Give us a sense of how it works in Bihar, in India.
Yeah. So this is also a very, very recent development on the entire gamut of the family-based alternative care and aftercare in Bihar. And interestingly, I mean, first I'll just explain the structure, how it operates. So basically, in Bihar and of course in other states as well, but in Bihar we have a full cadre. As per there's this integrated child protection scheme, which is now called Mission Vatsalya. Vatsalya means childhood. So that's the name of the scheme. So the scheme comes from the government, after the government legislations and laws. And then the scheme has got mandatory positions created starting from the state level to the district and the sub-district level. But it's largely the district level which has got, state level, of course, it's called State Child Protection Society. So there's a full 15 or 20 people, working at the state level, especially on child protection. So this is a very new cadre. This was not there before 2010. And in Bihar, I'm happy to share that we were the first ones to pilot in 10 districts, this entire structure. Then at the district level, this was the District Child Protection Unit. So we have at the state level, the State Child Protection Society. Then at the district level, the District Child Protection Unit, and the District Child Protection Unit has got, for example, there are program managers, institutional, non-institutional, outreach worker, social worker, there's a legal worker, counselor, like that. So there are about 11, 12 members, and Bihar is one of the very few or the. Oh, oh.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry, we lost you for a second.
Okay.
Go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah. So in Bihar, we have a dedicated cadre, which is a state-sponsored cadre, and these are people, both at the state level, and then it comes to the district level. So we have a team of about 12 to 15 members, who are institutional, non-institutional care, the outreach workers, the social workers. Sorry, Avi, I'll just put off the phone. There's a yeah. Yeah, so we have this cadre at the state level and then at the district level, and Bihar is one of the first states, or if I may say, the only state where this is a state-sponsored cadre. So these people are permanent employees, so there's no fear of losing the job or insecurities and things like that. And then this whole thing on the family based, I mean, first I will just explain how it all happens, and then we have, the child line and things like that as part of the entire system. So, any case or we have outreach workers and all, who go out into the field and who, they get cases, or people can come, on their own also. We have two bodies mandated under the Juvenile Justice Act. One is called the Child Welfare Committee, CWC. They have magisterial powers for dealing with all kinds of children who are, in need of care and protection. For example, the category that I mentioned before, if there's an orphan child, if there's a single parented, if there's an abused child, neglected child, any kind of child who's a survivor of abuse, sexual, physical, mental, whatever, and who has been brought before the Child Welfare Committee or to the District Child Protection Unit. They are presented to the CWC, and then the Child Welfare Committee, depending on the best interest principle of the child, that's a committee, one chairperson, and there are 2-3 members depending on the size of the state or the district. And then they take a decision based on the best interest of the child at that point of time, whether the child has to be reunited with his parents, not sent into foster care, not sent into family-based alternative care, sent for aftercare. So all this, or, there are, for example, in Bihar, we have a huge number of cases of elopement, where young boys and girls in their adolescent age, they elope, for love. But then a lot of times the girls become, pregnant or things like that. And then this again falls under POCSO then, that Prevention of Children Against Sexual Offences Act. So there are a lot of, it's not that white and black, So these children or these girls, they are kept in the childcare institution, whether if the boy is underage, below 18, the boy is also kept in another boys' childcare institution. And if the boy is a man, say over 18 years of age, then there's a case of POCSO against that man, wherein, I mean, the case of POCSO anyway is there, whether it's a boy or a man, but then the kind of punishment differs, right? If it's a child or if it's a adult. So these kind of things. And then we have Childline also, which is one of the largest source of getting, information from the field or cases, things like that. And then, in terms of the foster care and the family-based alternative care, these are also very new domains. And there was recently, about 6 years back, there was a massive case of child abuse in one of the childcare institutions, and that caught national and international headlines and things like that. But the good thing is that there's always a pro and a con of any case. So the good thing emerged is that we were able to convince the government to actually start this entire thing on family-based alternative care, foster care, aftercare, wherein we were able to put these, the children within childcare institutions. We were able to put them for various, kind of families, and this whole process of deinstitutionalization started gaining a lot of momentum. So this is about, if I may say, about a 6 years old kind of a journey, because I had just joined Bihar at that point of time. But then nonetheless, the government did a wonderful job of, kind of understanding the gravity, of the matter, and then that this whole ownership of the childcare institutions largely was taken over by the government rather than the civil society, because this happened, within a civil society governed CCI, childcare institution. So yeah, so now we have a full, understanding on foster care, kinship care, aftercare. We have placed more than 200 adolescents into aftercare, and a very, very successful model wherein even children with disabilities, have been, put through that, and they are doing wonderfully well. I mean, our adolescent boys and girls are in some of the 5-star hotels, in the hospitality industry, in a lot of other beauty, makeup, hair styling, whichever, or driving, whichever is suitable, or after a proper kind of a needs assessment, which is done for every child. We also have a very good case management system, and I must say again, Bihar has one of the best case management systems in terms of the MIS, the Management Information System. So that is there for all the children who are entering the system. So we have a database and we have a dashboard and it's all done in a very, very authentic manner. Everything is, all the children, their needs are assessed and everything is put onto the CPMIS. And from where the government and the commissions or the Supreme Court can also monitor, because we also provide data to the Supreme Court, both quantitative and qualitative. And then there is a child labor tracking system as well, wherein all the children who have been, rescued from labor, they are given compensation by the state, which is again a huge amount. And also, as I mentioned before, the children who are put into foster care or family-based alternative care, they also get those families are also getting a good, moderately well amount of money to look after in terms of the family strengthening, So yeah, of course, there is still, a long way to go. We are still learning. And very recently, I'm happy to share, that we had a 2 days conference, a national level conference, wherein we had Hope and Homes, from Romania and similar organizations who are working at a global level on deinstitutionalization, on family strengthening. And we brought academia, we brought civil society, UN agencies all together under one platform, and the government, and that was a huge level of advocacy platform, wherein, we had a 2 days dialogue and trying to come to, what are the global standards and how, as India, how well we are doing, what is it we need more to achieve, and things like that. So in terms of foster care and kinship care, I will still say that we still have a long way to go, because it is still work in progress, because, we have burnt our fingers, but at the same time, we have not stopped, trying it. And we have developed resource packages and everything on these components separately also.
Okay. So I'm gonna try and get even more into the micro. So as I understand, there are referrals. There are different ways that children get referred to the service, the civil service. That's through, you said, walk-ins, phone calls. There's a children's head phone line. Are there then social workers or workers who have caseloads? And if they do, can you walk us through what that process is? And I'll tell you why I'm asking, because again, in my world here in Canada, you get a referral, the worker meets with the child, the family, and the alleged perpetrator and does an investigation. And then the purpose of it all is to ensure safety and well-being with the family and so on. How does it work in your context?
One of the things I missed, Avi, in the last conversation was I spoke about the Child Welfare Committee, which have the magisterial powers for the children in need of care and protection, where children are either victims or survivors of crime or any kind of, this thing, or they are runaway and things like that. The other legal body is the Juvenile Justice Board. So we also have a huge number of children who commit any kind of offenses. So now we are we don't call them like juveniles and crimes and things like that. We have developed a lot of these legal protocols on what should be the terminology that are used. So we are using the word offenses, and any child committing any kind of offense, against any other child. So this or an adult for that matter. So the children who are committing offenses like, there are three kinds, petty, serious, and heinous. And then there's this board, Juvenile Justice Board, which has a proper magistrate who's a qualified legal magistrate as the principal magistrate. And then he or she is supported by a body of 2 social workers. So that, so previously, now this is a revision from the previous times where the cases were completely and solely decided upon by the bench, by the only sole one magistrate, a lot of times these magistrates would not have so much of an understanding on the exact issue or the root causes or so-called like whatever, because they are dealing on a very different basis. So that's the reason this is a very progressive kind of phase where the magistrate is supported by two social worker. One of them has to be a woman, and so that there is a fair listening or hearing of the case and a fair process, or the even getting into this whole thing of cases, that what merit it has. And in India we are also trying to push with the help of the Supreme Court in terms of being more progressive on this whole thing of if a child is committing an offense, if it is, for example, if a child below from 0 to 7 years is committing even a heinous offense like a murder or two murders or rape, whatever, so then that should be naturally freed, and that should not come under the paradigm of like a crime, in that sense. But then, of course, from 7 to 12 years, the bench will decide, the legal justices bench will decide what was the mind, whether the child has committed in it all his mental this thing or whatever, those kind of things. So that's like a doubtful thing where they take, they assess the child, and based on that assessment, the results, and then after that, till 18, of course, then the other, things follow. Now, these children also live in the observation homes or the other kinds of homes. Those are institutions. And but we are also trying to have a proper case management system for these children as well, because there's a growing instance where children are being used for organized crimes like drug trafficking or guns trafficking, things like that. And they are used by the adults, knowing well that these children would get freed very easily, because the act is not so strong or stringent for them as it is for the adults. So the adults would be sent into prison, but for the children, this is the observation home, we are called, where they are kept in under observation and all. And if there's a conviction, then they are sent to a special home. Again, the judges are also taking decisions based on, for example, not always there would be punitive actions. There would be also community work and things like that, where they try to engage the child into more or the this thing into more of a community work or social work, where their mind is also kind of more positive and things like that. And it's not that they are turning into even more hardened criminals, out of this. So the entire focus is on rehabilitation. That's a huge shift from where we were, say, like 10, 15, 20 years back. Now, coming to the case management, as I said, it is like very, very done in a very meticulous manner. So from the time the social worker also visits the family to assess the family, whether the family is, even if it is the own biological parents, many times the biological parents are not capable, or there is abuse within the family. So things like that. So like I said, for every individual child, we have a ICP, it's called individual case profile. And then also there is SIR, the social investigation report, which is sought by the Child Welfare Committee or the police and things like that. And then the decision, is the final decision is actually taken not at the police level or not at the DCPU, Child Protection Cadre level, but actually at the level of either the Child Welfare Committee or the Juvenile Justice Board, depending on the nature of the case. Like if it's a child in need of care and protection, it goes to the CWC. If it's in conflict with law, it goes to the JJB. Now, this entire mechanism has to work hand in hand with each other, because starting from the police, which is said to be the first responder in any child protection cases, because mostly even if it is a lost and found child, or a trafficked child or whatever it is, the police comes into play. So then the police will have this entire filing, that the police has a role to involve the District Child Protection Committee or the Child Helpline, and ask them to support their investigation in terms of making family visits or assessment of the child or referring the child to a childcare institution, things like that. But they also, have a cadre called, which is very important again, child welfare police officer. So in India, as per the new act, we have special juvenile police unit, and every special juvenile police unit has got child welfare police officers, CWPOs, where at least a woman has to be a mandatory. And then there are a lot of roles and rules for them also. They have to be in civil dress, and they cannot keep the child for interrogation more than 24 hours within the police station. They have to be kept in a child-friendly space, with counselor, with social worker, and things like that. So yeah, that's how basically, sorry, this
But
whole thing works.
Gargi, so if I'm to understand you, and let me give you an example. So if a child calls the hotline and says, my dad hits me all the time, right? And I wanted to stop. Are you saying then that the case itself is managed by that police unit, not by?
No, sorry. So if the child calls up the helpline, then the case would not go to the police. The
Okay.
child helpline coordinator would send the, someone, a social worker or a outreach worker, whatever it is, to verify the case first, whether the child is lying or saying the truth or what's the problem, things like that. But of course, this is all done in a very confidential manner because, we don't want the child's parents to already know that the child has called the helpline and get him into more trouble. So it's all done very diligently. And I can say that based on my own experience as a childline coordinator, we have to keep things confidential. In case it needs be, I have also acted as a decoy customer myself, or a decoy, like, in the garb of, for example, I would not give my identity, but I showed up as someone else to kind of rescue the child from the house of the employer and things like that. So yeah, so it will then it will be the role of the child line if the child is going
Okay.
if the case is going to them. And many a times, interestingly, even the police refers the case back to child line. If, for example, say a police has got a child's case, they may ask the child line as social workers to intervene and seek their support, also many times to keep the child also as a place of safety. But then if the case is directly going to the, sometimes, for example, if it's a child in conflict with law, where the child has committed an offense, then nothing doing, it is always the police.
Got it.
It does
Right.
not go to any other,
Is
yeah.
there, so there's a situation, if I'm hearing you, where the police do not get involved and it's all the social worker working with the family, correct? Okay. In that situation where it's social worker working with family directly, unrelated to police, um, in the process, in the way that it's managed, does the child get a voice in it, in it? Does the worker listen to the child about what they want? Is there a network of family and friends that are involved in ensuring safety and well-being? Ultimately, what is the purpose in that particular investigation for the social worker?
Yeah, so basically, the child is very much involved, like in a typical case, across all cases, especially when there's a need in care and protection of a child. The child's best interest also depends on, on what the child wants. For example, the child may not want to go back home or may not want to stay with the foster parents, because we have had such cases in the past, where the child, after 6 months, and the child was doing very well, the parents were so happy, they did not have a child and they got a child. And I'm talking about a specific case about 3 years back, where we tried to give the child in foster care, and it was a very successful case because the child gained weight, he was sent to school, and he was doing wonderfully well. But the child became so sharp, based on the kind of care and nutrition, and his cognitive abilities also developed. He actually started remembering his own family and the location, the geographical location. And also he started saying that, my so-called my sister or her family, because he did not have his own parents or his grandmother. They were staying in a border area near Nepal, and he wanted to be reunited with his biological, even if even it was like distant family, like not like immediate in terms of own father or mother, but still, we actually gave all the importance to the child's wishes, and the district child protection unit actually then restored the child back to the to the biological family, although the foster family was so much in distress because they had spent like about 50,000 rupees during the 6 months out of their own pockets as his own child and things like that. But it was like, for us, it was a very special case, and it became very difficult to arrive to that conclusion, or but then finally what mattered was the child's wishes. And so similarly, we have other cases whether after staying for a couple of months or a days, even the family, the foster family, objected, saying that the child was bedwetting and they did not know about it earlier, and they wanted to return the child. So those kind of problems also we face, where the child was sent back to the childcare institution. And then, but then we would mark such families, and we would not want to give any child, because for us it is like how we promote, it's like the family is later, the child's wish is first. So so it's not that the family wants a child, so we have to select a child for the family. It has to be the other way around. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And the focusing on the social workers again, is there for consistency of practice when they meet with a child in a family, is there a consistent methodology that they all use, like a risk assessment tool and a safeguarding tool that they use, and it's all consistent, or is it everybody kind of does their own thing?
So on the whole, Avi, we have a very, excuse me, a very set pattern of, we have formats and all that, and we are constantly working on those, so that many a times what happens, however much you follow these set patterns and mandatory forms and formats and kind of interviews and all, still the final decision or the final thing would always depend on, for example, how a case is dealt would always depend on the individual, right? I mean, the individual's passion or involvement or commitment. And we cannot say that every individual would have the same level of passion or commitment or counseling skills or listening skills, so on and so forth, or even investigating skills. So, but we do follow, every social worker follows a set pattern of steps, across. And as a state, we are trying to make it more and more kind of like protocol based, where it is becoming, we are trying to make it more and more mandatory, that these are all the 1, 2, 3, 4 steps that you need to follow. But a lot of times during our trainings and all, we are also focusing on this whole thing of, when a lot of details are missing in one form, for example, we don't find all the details when you compare two forms or two districts, the kind of information that is coming for a child, where you can actually take a decision on his needs or his or her needs assessment, that will not follow the other forms. They would be more like very vague, or just write, oh, the boy or the child needs education or reunited, but no detailing, that how many times now. But then many a times there is much more detailing, and it's like really good. So we are trying to, through a lot of efforts and collaboration with the government, and we have a very, very committed leadership at the government level, so we are trying to make these processes more streamlined and more mandatory, so that more uniform ways are followed, and not, so for example, giving more options so that they just have to tick mark and not, maybe not write so much if they are not keen to write, or if they are themselves not so well, because many a times we also don't have we have a dearth of professionals as counselors, so those things also become a bit of a issue, and especially with children with disabilities, because this is also coming up as a new area.
Okay, thank you for that. So I have a better sense now of how things things work. And so I'm wondering what's the typical caseload number that each investigator or worker will have on average, and how long do they hold on to cases?
So, I mean, on an average, it would really depend from one state to the other. But if I talk about like Bihar, like I said earlier, that we are focusing a lot in of deinstitutionalization. So
Mm-hmm.
not more than 2,000 to 2,200 children are residing in institutions across the state, at one point of time. And these, I'm talking about the children in need of care and protection. Of course, the children in conflict with law, they are mandated to stay in the observation homes and all. But then the other thing is that the disposal of cases is much faster now if I compare it with previous years. And the other thing is also that although there is a faster disposal, but still there would always be pendency, especially, when it comes to the children in conflict with law, because there is one magistrate and then there are so many, children. The caseload is quite a lot, actually. So the manpower or the human power, is not enough. If I talk about the magnitude of the cases, especially in a state like Bihar, and the
Mm.
number of staffs or social workers or counselors that we have,
So do you have
they
time
are
frames,
actually meeting.
Gargi?
Sorry?
Do you have time frames? So here in Canada, by law, you have time frames of how long you can keep cases open. Is that the same with you, for you?
Yes, we do. We do have time frames, Avi, but many a times the time frames are also trespassed. I mean, not always, they are kept, but we do have time frames.
You
Yes,
do.
there
Okay.
are some mandatory time frames that within 24 hours, within 48 hours, the child has to be presented, so on and so forth.
I see. I see. Okay. And and this is always interesting for practitioners from around the world because within different countries, there is prevalence of different types of abuse. And what is primarily or most of what practitioners in Bihar are seeing in types of cases? What are the most of the cases that they're working with?
Yeah, so the most of the cases, as I said, nowadays the case loads on elopement, cases of elopement has increased, and then those children are both being looked at as children in conflict with law. If it's a POXO case, sexual,
Can
relationship.
you explain what that means? Can you give us an explanation of that means? Because I've never heard of it. What
Okay,
does it mean?
okay. Okay, so it means elopement means like a situation where an adolescent girl and boy, they fall in love with each other. I'm talking about the most simple cases, but it can be very complicated because what largely happens is that, so a boy and a girl fall in love with each other and then they run away, right? Without telling their families or from the school or whatever. Yes. They run away from school or from the community or village, whatever, and then the girl's family uh, puts a case, in the police station against the boy. The case is of kidnapping or trafficking, and then the complication begins, because then there is Prevention of Children Against Sexual Offences Act, POXO is put, because if the girl and the boy have stayed for a night or overnight or for a couple of nights or couple of months, so there is sexual. So although it had consent, right? Because the girl, I mean, I'm talking about a very normal case. A lot of times, what happens, even if it is there is luring in it. For example, the girl was lured, she was trafficked, and then in the name of love, romantic relationships. But then there are 2, 3 of his friends who come and also rape her or molest her or whatever. So these are the typical kind of cases that we are getting when it comes to the alleged involvement of the girls and boys. And because there's a lot of shame and stigma also attached to the girls. So these also become as prestige issues for the girl's family and the larger family. And, then there's a fight between the families and police is involved and things like that. And the boy and the girl are put in different institutions. And sometimes this can go on for years. So, for example, until the girl attains 18 years of age, many a times these girls, it becomes even more complicated when the girls don't want to go back to their own parents. And they insist that they want to go with the husband, with the boy or with the boy's family. The other kind of cases are, like I told you, the drug trafficking or the guns trafficking and things like that, where, these mostly adolescent boys are used by the adults, into various issues. And the massive chunk of cases are of child labor, children, who migrate for labor, for domestic or industrial labor, forced labor. And that is mostly boys again. And the girls are largely trafficked, or they are brought into labor for sexual purposes, or, it can start with an orchestra, dance performance and things like that, but it can go into many other layers of, abuse. So yeah, so these are some of the most kind of largely that is seen. But one section which I must mention here, and that is the section of children with disabilities who are lot of times abandoned by the own family's parents. There are unwed or even orphans, like unwed mothers, or families who have a child with a disability, and they would be just abandoned. So these children, their their rehabilitation becomes the largest challenge for the state, because they have nowhere to go. So what do you do after 18 years of age? How long can the state support? So although we are trying to look at the entire gamut of aftercare, but it's becoming more and more challenging, because to put these children into foster care also, like I just shared a case of bedwetting, the child was just returned back by the family. It wouldn't be so if that child was their own biological child. Or many a times, even due to poverty, even that happens, that the own biological children are abandoned by the families.
Wow. Okay, so it's quite different than the challenges or the types of cases here we see in the West. Um, Almost completely different. So it's quite fascinating. So in the last 5 minutes that we have together, can you maybe tell us a little bit about what are the challenges that our frontline staff face every day, and then what are some of the misconceptions about the work? So what the community within Bihar or India, what is the misconception about the work that you do, or the
Yeah.
misunderstandings?
Yeah, thank you so much, Avi. I think as a child protection practitioner, you or me, we all agree, and in our last call also, that child protection is a very new and emerging area. I would emphasize that. So there are a lot of misconceptions about this whole, area of work. For example, if I compare it with nutrition or education or health, which is very, very clear, you either do vaccination, or there's a neonatal care or a maternal care, or in nutrition, there's a malnourishment or whatever. But in child protection, there are layers of grace. It's not like black or white. And then that becomes a challenge. There is shame, there is stigma. So, for example, I feel that most of the challenges that our team members, whether it's a social worker, whether it's a civil society, a team member, or our own, team members who work on the ground level face on a day-to-day basis, are a combination of shame, stigma, social norms. Because in child protection, I see, especially in the Indian context, and now that I said I'm in Bihar, there are a lot of social norms which are harmful social norms, and which have been practiced for ages. So it's very difficult to just, like, you just cannot remove those social norms, right? Because the hardest thing is working on the mindset change, so that I find is the hardest. You can change institutions, you can make buildings, you can make child friendly spaces, but to work on the mindset of the people, to change the community thinking, to change the caste equations, there's a huge lot of disparities between the people who have and the have-nots. It's not only as simple as rich or poor. And then there's a whole lot of complex situations which plays into account, especially for child protection professionals on the ground. Is this every year we have natural calamities, which come as an additional burden, whether it is floods or droughts or conflict, and then there are additional issues of the political will. So a lot of times, even if you have the best of intentions, a lot of times you are kind of influenced, which I may say, even police, during our police trainings, they also come up with various examples where they are threatened, they are kind of subjugated by the political parties or things like that, or higher authorities, that no, you have to take such and such decision for a child. And it becomes very difficult because then this whole thing of corruption, I think that plays a major role, where we don't have any control. The other challenge I would see is this whole thing of convergence. So here I also see it as a challenge, where other sectors also look at us very differently. They cannot understand child protection. They think that, oh, when we are providing good food and nutrition and health, and we are taking care of the water and sanitation and other things, then why is child protection needed? The child is automatically protected. So that is one of the largest misconceptions I think I have also faced in my career, and I still face. But then this whole gamut where child protection is viewed differently, the acceptance is low and it is slow, but I would still be optimistic and say it is changing. We also have human power, which is very, very less when I compare it with other sectors, health,